So bringing together the plan direction and the funding opportunities that Yvette talked about. The project focuses on Richmond Street. James, can you advance for me, please? Yeah, James is trying to do double duty, get the Zoom folks in and advance our slides. So the project is looking at Richmond Street from Hill Street in the north all the way down to Fairmount in the south. So it's a pretty long stretch, and Mosier Lane is right about in the middle of our project area. And as Yvette alluded to, the purpose of this project is really about serving the needs of all users, balancing that limited public space in order to establish what we call a complete street. And that's important to meet the three high-level project goals, which are really around safety, around managing vehicle speeds and minimizing conflicts, connectivity, improving connections, especially to those east side destinations, and accessible connections for people who are walking or biking or rolling, as well as feasibility. We want to make sure that we're looking at a project that can be implemented within the available funding that Yvette talked about a little bit earlier. So in the project name is one of the project's guiding principles, this idea about complete streets. And every complete street looks a little bit different depending on its context, but the underlying principle is this idea that however we're traveling, we all have a right to use the street in a way that is safe and comfortable and convenient. So it's really this idea, again, and you'll hear me say this a number of times, of balancing limited public space so that we can serve all of the people who want to use the street. One of the other key principles that guides this project comes from one of our funding sources, the Safe Streets for All principles. And this is a whole system of design and education, engineering ideas, and other tools that really look at how can we systemically improve safety in our communities. So it means that with any project like this one, we don't want to do spot or Band-Aid treatments for something at this corner and then something different at that corner. We really want to look at the corridor as a whole and change behavior and really think about that as an integrated piece. So that's what we mean by systemic treatments. So not only is this project based on plans, policies, those funding sources, the guiding principles, it's also based on community engagement. And some of you are very familiar faces, some of you are meeting for the first time tonight. The engagement process for this project started just about a year ago when we went and tabled to talk about the project at the 4th of July event in Cerrito Vista Park. We met folks there, we started to share that the project was happening, gathered information, and then following that way back when, in September, we had the first project workshop, and that was an opportunity to hear from folks about their concerns, their lived experience on the street, what are some opportunities there, and really understand existing conditions. Based on that, we came back for another workshop here in this space in November, and that was an opportunity to share concepts. What were some of the ways that we could look at balancing those needs on Richmond Street, meeting the project goals, and talked about some different ways that could be approached. And then all of that went into a first preliminary design plan, a previous version of what you see on the boards here, that was shared out in a workshop focused on residents who live on Richmond Street, and that was held at the Rec Center in December. So since then, we've heard from a lot of you. We've had some, next slide, please. We've had some one-on-one conversations with residents out at their homes. We had online surveys throughout the process. We've met with city committees and local organizations, groups, and all of that outreach and feedback has come together into the revised preliminary plans that you see here tonight. So we understand that everyone here is wanting to share and to ask questions, and we're also hoping to balance that some with talking with you about your address on the boards and what's particularly proposed there or what's planned for that location. So let's move on to the next kind of segment, the presentation, where we're going to look at project strategies. And this is the high level. These are really kind of the big picture strategies that we're applying systemically along the corridor. And there are 5 of them. There's this idea of safe walking, smooth surfaces, safe speed, sorry, I can't see my boards, street trees and rain gardens, which we're also calling green infrastructure, and then the idea, of course, of safe bicycling. So there's a lot of text on this one tiny slide. So let's go forward and we'll talk a little bit more about safe walking. So this is a graphic that shows an intersection, but I want to start by saying that one of the key, maybe less charismatic elements here is really looking at updating all of the accessible ADA ramps along the corridor to meet current best practices. So that's kind of a foundational project element. But we're also including corner bulb outs in some locations, and that really shortens the crossing distance and it improves visibility for folks who are trying to get out into the street so that the approaching vehicle can see you better. We're also looking at raised intersections and high visibility crosswalks in some locations, as well as lighting to improve nighttime visibility. And at those key intersections that really see a lot of traffic from the students, also adding what's technically known as rectangular rapid flashing beacons. There's a flashing crosswalk lights that you can push as a pedestrian, the lights flash, and it helps to improve driver yielding, right? So it helps drivers become aware that someone is trying to cross here so that they will slow down or stop. So next, I'll talk a little bit about smooth surfaces, but we're really continuing that idea of safe walking. We know that there's some areas where the sidewalks in our corridor have some severe damage. So we want to make sure that those are repaired so that we have smooth walking surfaces. We're also including, as we've heard from many of you, this very important piece of resurfacing the roadway curb to curb from Hill down to Fairmont. So that's improving the roadway surface there. And there are a couple of samples up there on the slide that you can see of the sample conditions of both of those surfaces. Next, talking about safe speed. So in the safe walking section, I showed you an example of an intersection. And those safety and accessibility treatments for pedestrians do sort of double function as traffic calming elements. But Richmond Street has long blocks, and we've heard from many of you that your speed concerns have to do with vehicles speeding up in between intersections or in between signals. So that we know that we also have to put in traffic calming elements mid-block. We heard from you about an appreciation for the speed cushions that you have. The plan includes speed tables, which are more comfortable for our emergency vehicles as well, provide that access. And these in the south of Mosier stretch are paired with tree bulb outs. So that doesn't come out into the travel lanes, but it does bring the street tree canopy a little further in. It kind of visually narrows the roadway. And again, that psychologically helps our drivers slow down, and that's paired with the traffic calming element of the speed table. Now, when we look north of Mosier, we've included chicanes, and chicanes are a very effective traffic calming element, which on one of our boards, you can see an example of this on Novia Street in Berkeley, and this is a lateral shift. It basically creates a curve in the road, and that is a tool for calming traffic. It's also been one of the tools that's allowed the north of Mosier area to integrate bike facilities while also maintaining as much of the public parking as feasible. So this is one of our key elements where we're trying to balance, right, all of the needs of the users who are along Richmond Street. In our next slide, we touch on this idea of green infrastructure. And what's shown in the image here is this idea that when we use street trees by selecting them for color, texture, size, and shape, we can highlight those traffic calming elements, change the driver's perception. We can also create greater shade and improve or support neighborhood identity. And we can make sure that we're planting species that are going to thrive well in our narrow planting strips and that will integrate with the overhead utility lines, not just the big poles that run down one side or the other, but those connections that run from those utility lines to your house. They're all over up there. So we have to make sure that we're identifying planting spaces and species that are going to do well in your context. So in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about our fifth strategy. as you may know, and as Yvette mentioned early on, Richmond Street together with Ashbury is a designated bike route within the city's plans. And the Richmond Street Ashbury route is a key north-south connector that roughly parallels Ohlone and San Pablo, which serve the center and the west of the city. But the Richmond Street or the East Side Greenway is really intended to serve those East Side destinations. So you can see on this map, those blue dots represent schools, parks, community centers, the swimming pool, all or many of which are east of Richmond Street. So this is really the connectivity piece element for that. You can also see in red on that diagram some of the barriers, some of the issues that that bikeway is threading. The red lines are those disconnected side streets. Indicate areas where there's some steep topography that make a safe, comfortable route in particular pretty challenging. And you all are probably pretty familiar with the PGE station that's between Schmidt and Porter that effectively blocks off north-south travel for everyone, for all modes in that area. So if we go to the next slide, this harkens back to the earlier image that showed the chicanes. And again, this is sharing the idea that in order to connect to those east side destinations, to meet current best practices, we needed to work with you to figure out a way to integrate on-street bike lanes with traffic calming and still maintain as much of that public parking as possible. So this is really where a lot of that kind of balancing of limited space comes together. So I know that at this point, we had intended to share information about the project boards that were and still are around the room. And I just want to say that what these boards do is really take these concepts and these strategies, and they show how the design plan applies them to each block in the corridor. So if you wanted to, you could go find your address and you could see which of these concepts we just talked about are happening there in your area. And we look forward to the opportunity to talk with you a little bit more about that. But with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Marisa so that we can move to our next step with opening things up. Sorry, we're going to be really tied to this mic as we move into some Q&A.
All right, everyone, thanks for listening to that presentation. We're going to do some Q&A, question and answers. I'm going to just kind of explain how the Q&A is going to work before we get into it. So hold on for just a second. We had originally planned to do about 10 minutes, which is what you see on the board. We got a request since there are so many people here that we should go a little bit longer. So we're going to do about 20 minutes of question and answer. So as a reminder, this Q&A period that we're about to have is meant to be broader questions about the project. So questions that you have about where the project has come from, project history, project elements, large scale things like that. Anything that you have that's a kind of one-on-one conversation that's very specific to your property or your situation as your property faces the street, please save that for the one-on-ones with the project team at the end. And we want to just do that to make sure that we, for one, receive all of your individual questions and we're able to address them effectively, and also that everyone here has a chance to ask the questions that they need to ask. We also are taking comments during this meeting, as we talked about in the beginning. However, all comments, in order to be received, must be submitted in writing. So you can write them on your comment cards that we passed out at the door on your way in. There's still some there if you need some. At the end of the meeting, you can leave them at the door. You can give them to any one of us. You can also submit comments in writing via email. We'll have the email address in that bottom corner. It'll be on the next slide too. So you can send them in writing. You can send them in writing today. You can send them in writing for the next couple of weeks until July 8th, 9th. Thank you. Yes, that's the perfect type of question for the question and answer session. Yeah. So before we get into that, one more quick thing. We just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask their questions and everyone has a chance to be heard. And so we have some ground rules up there. We're going to limit questions to 1 minute per person. Obviously, you don't need to fill the whole minute with your question. One person at a time. So one person speaking at a time, one question at a time. And we'll have one question from each person and we'll move through the room. And then if we get done with everyone's questions, we'll start to circulate to some of the same people again. We have our folks on Zoom who will be listening. Everyone who's on Zoom, please feel free to submit your questions in writing to the email address, the Public Works email address, and we'll collect your questions that way. And anything else?
So we're also trying to coordinate with the folks on Zoom. Yeah. So we're also trying to coordinate with the folks on Zoom. So, and these mics are connected to the Zoom, we hope, at this point, right? So Marissa's gonna help identify folks so that we can move through questions. I'm gonna repeat every question into the mic. So the folks who don't have a chance to be here tonight can also hear all of your questions. And then we're gonna, as a team, respond to your questions, and the folks who are giving our response, we're gonna kind of all hang out up here so that we can also give our answers into the mic as well, and everyone can hear those. What? Yeah. Yeah. So, while we're getting our first person on deck, I'd like to ask our project team to come up to the front so we're all kind of ready and we can get rolling here. I can hear pretty well, but please do project a little bit. Yeah. It's
Lights and potholes, I'm all for lighting up crosswalks and having lights.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I just make a request to the crowd? So again, I'm Karen Pincus. I'm the city manager, and I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I know there's a lot of questions. There are a lot of, dare I say, some very high feelings in this room tonight. There are people that are here that are representing all facets of our community. We are all neighbors. We live here. We have to live with one another. I would please ask to start off by let's just make sure that tonight's discourse is a good one so that, again, we're neighbors. But I'd also like to ask if you could try to refrain from applause or boos or anything like that, because we don't want people to feel uncomfortable speaking. If someone is here that has an opposing view and they're afraid to speak because they may get yelled down or they might not get clapped at, that is a detriment to public speaking. So I'm just making that request, please, for all of us in this Q&A, and I appreciate your comments, sir. Thank you. I just want to start off by saying that as we do this Q&A and as we're talking around the room, you know, let's just all please remember that we're neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. And as we're going, if you could lead with your question, because we want to make sure that we're sharing as much information as we can, and that you have a chance to speak with and respond to questions and answers, right? Sorry. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, yeah. Let's go ahead and take some more and I'll get to that. Yeah. Thank you for that question. We will work on that. You were asking if we could turn on closed captioning. So we are working on it. Thank you. So it sounds to me like your question was about the methodology used for the parking occupancy data that said the parking and access board in the back there. So for that, I'd like to invite Jarrett to come forward. I know that data was collected fairly recently.
We'll come back to your question in a minute. Let me just answer the parking question. To calculate the parking occupancy, which is on that board back there, so I encourage you all to check it out. We did an inventory of the parking spaces, which excludes driveways, because you can't park in front of a driveway. So that's not a parking space. And then as far as the methodology for collecting the occupancy, we used license plate reader technology, which is essentially it's a camera that's mounted on a vehicle, and you drive up and down the corridor, and it counts a vehicle when it's parked. And it uses a camera system that's very sensitive and software to take in parking occupancy. The police use the same type of equipment when they do parking enforcement, so it is very sensitive and calibrated to get accurate data.
So I'm going to circle back to our first speaker, who, in addition to comments, did ask a couple of questions. So I heard two questions in there, I believe. One was about explaining why or how it is that curb extensions help to increase visibility for folks who are crossing the street. And then I think the other one was about the chicanes in general. Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you for that question. Again, my name is Robert. And so the purpose of the curb extension or the bulb out is to put the pedestrian farther out into the intersection on top of a curb. So at number one, shortens their crossing distance so they don't have to walk across as many lanes. And two, it provides an improved sight line for a pedestrian that might be looking down the road for an oncoming car. And it also helps a vehicle see a pedestrian that might be wanting to cross the road. So the bulb outs or the curb extensions are absolutely critical for helping us get across the street. It also helps narrow the street a little bit, which also helps slow folks down as they might be traveling in a vehicle down it. As I think both Yvette and Jesse mentioned, the section north of Mosier, we're trying to balance a lot of uses. We're trying to keep vehicles traveling up and down it. We're trying to help pedestrians circulate. We're trying to calm traffic. And we know we have this need to improve cyclist access and safety along the corridor. And so in order to do that, the chicane or the slight curve we put in the road allows us the flexibility to alternate parking on either side of the street while allowing us to put the bike lanes there. The chicane also helps because it creates a curve in the road. It helps us slow the vehicle speeds down. So it's a multi-benefit to kind of accommodate these uses that Yvette was mentioning and the really difficulty of balancing these different needs.
I just wanted to jump in and say, it looks like we now have some mics that we can circulate out to folks. So I just wanted to confirm that even though you have the mic, do speak loudly and clearly and focus on your questions so that the folks on Zoom can participate. Is that correct? I want to confirm that that is the case. Yes. Okay, great. All right.
Thank you. I have one question, but it's kind of a two-parter. You mentioned all the stakeholders earlier. I didn't hear one person mention anything about the people who live on Richmond who need that space to park. I've looked, you've taken away, I think, 80 or not, if not more, parking spaces. So my question is, where are we supposed to park? And secondly, as you've done all kinds of studies, have you done any study that shows by taking away these parking spaces, what does that do to the value of the homeowner? And how do you plan to compensate for that? Thank you.
Okay, so the question was referring to the street parking and how it affects residents and their property values. So I encourage you, once this Q&A is over, to come back and see me. I'm going to be in the back corner over there. I'm going to be next to the parking board. And we did parking occupancy studies, and during peak times, it's about a third full. And that's not just on Richmond Street, but the parallel streets too. So Everett and oh, now I'm blanking. What's Elm, right? Elm Street. So there's a lot of parking in the area. Most properties have off-street parking. We also looked at a San Jose State study from 2022 that estimated the amount of parking in the entire 9-county Bay Area. And for these census tracts along the corridor, there's about 4.5 parking spaces per household. So as Robert mentioned earlier, and that includes on and off street. So that includes on and off street. So there's a lot of parking in the area. And I think that the challenge is when we're trying to balance limited public space, trying to accomplish all these public goods, there are trade-offs in some areas. And there's a lot of street parking in the area, but we know it's important to people. That's why we're doing blue zones on the cross streets to accommodate people with mobility disabilities. We are also offering, if you need to widen your curb cut, which is the slope that goes up from the street up over the sidewalk to access your own private parking. If you're having trouble using that, this project can help you. We can widen that. We can adjust the geometry. If it's too steep, we can look at flattening it out a little bit to help you use your private parking. So those are two things that we're doing to address parking. You want to take this?
Yvette again. Yes, we recognize the importance and the change that this would bring to the Richmond Street residents. So we did targeted outreach by mailing notices, 2 notices regarding the workshops. So we mailed notices for the September workshop that had the date for both the September and November. And then we mailed another notice for the November workshop. And then we did door hangers to really, because we know it's important, this project affects you. So we did extra targeted outreach to help you come out and learn about the project and provide your comments early on.
Okay. Okay, so how about we go over this way?
Hi, my name's Leah, Richmond Street resident. One of my questions is just about what we were talking about. You said peak times, but what about special events? Us personally, we love to have people over and host events. A lot of elderly folks come to our home. I don't know where they would park if you removed all our parking, and I don't know how we'd shuttle them into our home. The World One Festival is coming up, entire Richmond Street. There's no parking. We often move our cars for the residents who are attending the park. And then as well, the St. John's Hall just got bought by Tibetan monks, and they are now hosting parties, which is great. Take all our parking on the weekend. So I don't know if that was accounted for in the original studies. And as well, I don't know if I just haven't looked hard enough, but I haven't seen anything about crash data and bike crashes versus pedestrian crashes versus car crashes. We just had one last night on Portola in Richmond, so that's something that's very important to me, and I haven't seen anything on that.
Okay, so there's a 2-part question there. The first part is about parking and peak of the peak, I guess you could say, parking demand from special events and things like that, and how does the occupancy numbers account for that? And then the second question is what was about crash data and I would assume, how is that shaping the design? So I'll start with the crash data. So we did collect crash data early on in the first event, like in the first stages of this outreach work. And I want to say there were, in the last 5 years, I think there were 2 serious injury crashes along the corridor, and they were pedestrians at crosswalks. So we know that pedestrian safety is of paramount importance here. And that's why safe speeds is a key project strategy here. So basically, if a driver hits a pedestrian going faster than about 25 miles per hour, the likelihood of survival just falls off a cliff. So that's why all these traffic calming features here, they're engineered to try to keep most of the speed around the speed limit, basically. On top of that, all these intersections, especially in the area where the fatal injury or the serious injury was, have the curb extensions, which improve pedestrian visibility. They have the raised tabletop intersection, which controls speed, the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, which are those yellow flashing lights that are proven to really improve motorist yielding behavior. All of these countermeasures really go into the safety strategy. Now, to the parking question, yeah, peak events, there is parking demand during peak events, special events and things like that, but we just don't design our roads for those types of events. It would be, we'd turn in, if we designed our roads for kind of like once a year, twice a year events, we just have a lot of empty parking. And when we're trying to balance the needs of all users, designing for the peak of the peak is usually not the highest priority. I think the implication with street parking, the question was every Saturday is the peak of the peak, is, we have limited public space, and with this project, we see that the general parking occupancy is relatively low. A lot of people have off-street parking. It's not saying that there isn't a need for curb access, but you may have to park like a block or two away if you're trying to use street parking.
Hi, I have a question about lighting, and I know you. Hello?
Okay.
Maybe I had a question about lighting. I know you said that there was going to be some safety lighting at the intersections. Are you going to be putting lighting down the sidewalks? Because the sidewalks themselves are also very, very dark for walking at night. And so we really would like a lot more safety lighting than it currently exists.
Oh, so
I forgot. Loud all the time. Can't you hear me?
It's also for the people out in
Yes.
the lobby. Yeah.
So thank you very much for the reminder. So your question was about lighting and whether the project includes lighting between intersections. We talked about that at the intersections, but a preference for lighting along the street as well. Turn that over.
So thank you. Again, our funding is limited for this. We're investing quite a bit of money in asphalt, in concrete, in improving safety at intersections. We don't have sufficient funds to put lighting along the entire street today, but that doesn't mean in the future that couldn't be a future project. Right now, the lighting is being focused at the intersections, really to improve the visibility of pedestrians as they're crossing the road there. So we're adding additional lighting at some of the key intersections.
In front of her.
I just had a question about the funding. What year was the Safe Streets for All grant approved or received? And is that funding secure with the new administration?
So your question was about what year the Safe Streets for All funding was approved and whether that's secure.
Thank you for the question. So CCTA, Contra Costa Transportation Authority, we worked with the city to secure the grant. It is secure. The CCTA has secured a funding agreement with FHWA, so that's been executed. Your question was when it was secured initially. It was submitted the grant in 2022, and it was awarded in 2023.
The gentleman in red closest to the door.
Hello. Hello. Okay, so if you really wanted like safety for bicyclists, why did you have not have a grade separated bike?
So the question there was, given the importance of safety for bicyclists, why does not the project include grade separated bikeways? I think. Right, rather than in the roadway, sort of vertical separation.
Thank you. For those that were with us last fall, we actually did present some options of what's known as a Class 4 cycle track, which is actually a bicycle facility that's physically separated from vehicle traffic. But of course, in order to do that, it would require to remove all the parking along the corridor, as well as actually adjusting the bicycle facility to grade with the sidewalk would have been a very expensive proposition, and we wouldn't have had the funds to do that. So as we've been talking about tonight, it's really about a balance. How do we find a balance between all these needs? And that is the reason why we are today with the Class 2 bike lanes with the buffer.
Let's go right here.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Harry Reibman. I moved to El Cerrito in 2023 with my wife, Marlene. She was maybe 4 months pregnant at the time. We now have our daughter, Paulina, who is just 2 years old. We live on Elm between Gladys and Potrero. We take her to a daycare on Richmond every single day. We walk her the stroller. We cross that street. Agreed, maybe it's not the safest street. However, this plan was passed 10 years before we lived here. We didn't vote on it. What does the approval process look like? It sounds like there's a lot of buzzwords about support and healthier community, but we didn't vote on that. This impacts us. This impacts the residents here.
So it sounds like
imperative
you're
for us.
asking about the approval process for this particular
Yes, and
project.
this is a forum for public comment. I'm wondering where my voice is, because it seems like you're acting as if this is a foregone
You
conclusion.
want to-
So what is the final process? Do we have a vote, or is this all for nothing?
So thank you. In terms of how the project was developed, it was based on adopted city council plans and policies that guided us to apply for funding. And now we had workshops, as Jesse mentioned, beginning. Right.
Finish. Thank you. If you could let her finish, she can explain.
Can we have one person speak at a time, please?
These projects do take a long time to develop, and so if they build on all these different plans and policies. We do the workshops to more close to the project implementation to get input, and we're balancing the needs of the whole community. In terms of, if you have concerns about the policies that are shaping the project, then really those policies would need to be changed. But really, right now, we're implementing the city council's vision and direction, which was shaped by community input. These are long-range plans, and it does require long-range planning to get funding and implement projects. And so that's where we are now. In terms of how the design is approved, I'm charged as a city engineer, a licensed engineer, to approve the design. And that's, again, based on the adopted city plans and policies, the most current engineering guidance, balancing community input. And so I approve the design plans. We have been. Thank you. And if you have concerns about the policies, it is a sequence of events that forms this project. We are now presenting a refined preliminary design, and we're looking for your comments on that. And definitely, if you have concerns about the city's policies and plans, I encourage you to attend the July 15th council meeting.
Thank you. My name's Karen and I live in Elm Street. So can you hear me now? Okay. So my name's Karen and I live on Elm Street, and one concern I have is around the parking because it'll impact Elm. And I don't understand why Richmond needs a bike lane when Ohlone has a bike lane. And to me, it seems like it's the bike lanes that are taking away the street parking. So can you explain the justification for having both Ohlone and Richmond as a bike lane?
So your question was about how is it that multiple north-south routes like San Pablo and Ohlone and the Richmond Ashbury Greenway are all necessary or relevant. So I'm going to turn that one over to Jarrett.
So in our active transportation plan, which again is our long-range policy blueprint for essentially how we use limited public space and streets for bicycling and walking at least. There's generally 3 north-south bike corridors in the city. One is San Pablo Avenue to support the new growth that's planned for that corridor. The second is the Ohlone Greenway that we're all familiar with. And then the third is like the East Side corridor, which includes Richmond Street, and then it like jogs over on Mosier and heads over down on Ashbury. And the reason there's only those 3 corridors is because El Cerrito's hilly. And the East Side corridor it's really the last corridor that has like direct through north-south connectivity that avoids hills. So once you get east of Richmond Street, the streets, they're not as connected. They dead end. You can't get like all the way to BART, for example, Del Norte BART. You can't get past the PG&E substation. And then there's a lot of just hills in the way. There's a small hill on Richmond Street north of Mosier, but it's mostly flat. So that is why that corridor is uniquely suited to being a bikeway in the bike plan. So the question is, it's only 2 blocks away. So why do we need something on Richmond Street? And I like to think that, think of it from a perspective of driving. San Pablo Avenue is the main north-south corridor, but we have an entire network of roads in the city that makes it easy and convenient to drive almost anywhere at any time. A bicycle network functions in the same way. You need to have multiple corridors that serve multiple destinations to be really a functional choice in our transportation network. And that's really what the bike plan gets at too, is it's about expanding the bike network in the city and making it easier and more comfortable and safer to bike.
We're going to shift to the person in the yellow vest, come back into the middle, and then capture you in the striped shirt.
Go ahead, ask your question. It is, yeah.
Okay. My question is, so is this project going through? And if so, what are the plans to accommodate the excessive traffic flow when construction is going on Richmond Street, for example, for Elm Street and for any other adjacent street?
Thank you. Yeah, so the project is moving forward in this direction with refinements based on your comments tonight. It includes the basic elements you've heard about tonight with the chicanes and the bike lane and the traffic calming features. So that is the plan to move forward with this project. Unless there's a change in city council policy, we're moving forward with the project as shown here tonight. In terms of
excuse me, we had some rules of engagement about one person speaking at a time. So I just want to remind everybody of that while we wrap up this Q&A. Thank you.
In terms of the impacts during construction, yes, it's a very important. And so that's the next, as we continue to develop the design, we're going to look at construction phasing. How many blocks, sides of the street will be closed during construction to minimize impacts. But it will be disruptive. It's you saw the Wildcat pipeline project come through the neighborhood, and I know that was really difficult. We are repaving the street, curb to curb, and so that is a significant construction effort, and does require detours and different things like that. So thank you.
Jason, can you pass the mic to the woman in the scarf in the back? Thank you.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Hi. My name is Mimu. I live in Fairmount Avenue. And I have a little bit of a criticism and a question for everyone. So It's about approach and element you mentioned. I heard safety, connectivity, and feasibility, and creating a balance and completing everything. You know, thinking about how safe it is, comfortable, and convenient. But what I'm sensing is we are in this old way of problem solving, right? It's very fragmented. We have all problems, but you can't just solve problems and then say this is complete because it's still fragmented within. And my invitation is, can we unleash potential? Because this is a diverse community. We have a lot of ideas and we have lots of needs. And instead of having safety, of course, these are important. I'm not saying they're not important, safety, connectivity, feasibility, but can we, and this is a question for all of us, can we include joy, belonging, reverence, love, and create a community of restoration and regeneration for the generations down? You know, indigenous people say, think about 7 generations ahead of us. Can we create a community rather than just treating this as a street? And saying this is effective, this is functional. I think we can create a community together. And this is my question, how can we do that together?
Thank you, Minu, for that question. So this is a great question about creating community and thinking about our streets as the places that are all shared for all of us who live here. I think the scope of your question may be a little bit beyond the capacity of this particular project, but I think it's a great question to share in this forum. Thank you for that. So I know we've had another person who's been waiting a while here in the striped shirt. You had a question?
I think most of us understood that there would be loss of parking with this project. Most recently, I think many of us were led to believe it would be about 50% loss. And I think you would have a lot more cooperation if you had followed through on that. Exactly how and why did that change to primarily more than 60%, 70%, and on my block, 81% loss of parking? How and why did you change from something reasonable that people could live with possibly to these egregious numbers?
So it sounds like your question is about what is it about the design that affects where parking is removed and how much parking is removed? Yeah, so it sounds like your question then is about what has changed about the plan between the previous time you saw it? Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, the 50% number that was presented in the original workshop was an estimate before we, did the more detailed design that you see here. And we were trying again to balance the various elements that exist there. We refined the chicane design to make those more gradual. So it was really refinement of the design to work well given the existing conditions. And that's why the numbers change.
It's Jason. Okay, how about right here in the red shirt?
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, my name is Amelia. I live on Everett Street, just steps away from Richmond Street. And I'm going to share something that's really hard for me to share. But a child in my family was hit by a car in El Cerrito, very close to Richmond Street. And I'm sure all of you can imagine that that was the worst day of my life, riding in an ambulance with a child, not knowing if they were okay. And, I think that all of these perspectives are valid and important, and we need to support our neighbors. But I am very grateful that the city is going to make Richmond Street safer and slower. The cars drive way too fast. I drive way too fast on Richmond Street. It is just a long straight street and you can pick up a ton of speed. The speed carries over onto my street and streets around us. And I'm grateful that the city is thinking about pedestrian safety and bicycle safety. I am in a community of parents. Very few parents feel safe allowing their children to walk or bike in El Cerrito right now. It is a flat city with slow speed limits. There should be no reason kids should not be safe walking to school, walking to their friends' houses, but right now they are not. And I think that this will be a great improvement. I do really appreciate that there is loss here and that I would be frustrated too. I will be impacted because I'm close to Richmond Street, but it is something that is okay with me. And I just wanted to offer a different perspective because all the perspectives are important and valid. And I did want to ask, you know, has the city looked into how many of the people that are losing street parking, you know, what percentage of them have off-street parking options? Has the city looked into that?
So thank you for your comment and thank you for sharing your story. I know that we appreciate that and we've heard from you in the past and we appreciate you coming out again to share that. So the question was about the relationship between folks who have off-street parking and where parking is removed. Is that correct? Okay, thank you.
So the parking decisions are to really maximize the off-street parking supply. So for example, on south of Potrero, there is a block face. The eastern side of the street features properties, homes that actually get their access from the parallel side street. So there's no curb cuts, which means there's more parking capacity. So like that, those are the types of decisions that are made to really maximize the amount of off-street parking. We really couldn't like drill down into every single property, but throughout the outreach process, we've really asked people to come tell us like what are your street parking needs. We know that off-street parking isn't always workable for people's needs, and we want to hear, you know, how do you use the curb? How do you use this space? And you know, we've had people come to us and tell us to like, hey, widen my driveway a little bit so I can get into my driveway easier. And we've done that, and we're still taking that feedback. So there's things like that that can help you use your off-street parking. You know, please let us know.
That we have a lot of questions. We have a lot of folks who want to speak this evening. I also know that Jer's just alluded to, and some of the questions have alluded to this evening, that some folks have questions about their particular property, about the way the design, some folks have interest in how the design affects their particular property. So what I'm proposing, since we have about 15 minutes left in our meeting time this evening, is that folks who are interested in looking at the preliminary designs that are up on the boards, maybe shift out into the courtyard. We can move our boards out there, enjoy some of the last of the evening light, and talk a little bit more about the project design. And so we will take then one or two more questions, and then we'll join all of you in the courtyard to talk a little bit about the design.
And thank you again, everybody. I know that a lot of people have questions and I think that we can still answer them. We can still answer them one-on-one while we're next. I just wanted to go over one more time and even talking a little bit about the process and how we got here and what's next. So the active transportation plan, the complete streets policy, the citywide strategic plan, our climate action plan, these are all plans that have been developed over time in conjunction with the community. They weren't done in a vacuum. They were done publicly. They were approved by the city council over the years. And as Yvette had alluded to, that we have been fulfilling those plans over the years. But they were done publicly. They were done in a public process. And what we are doing as staff is we are trying to balance, we've heard that word a lot tonight, is we're trying to balance the needs of everyone that we hear from. And we know that there are a lot of people in this room who have one opinion, and there are a lot of people who are in this room that have another opinion. We are trying our best to do as much as we can for as many as we can. And that may mean that not everyone is going to be entirely happy, totally understand that, but we have been trying to do what we can to do the best with what we have been hearing from everyone. That said, just want to reiterate what Yvette had said about the July 15th City Council meeting. So our staff is going to prepare an update for the City Council on the active transportation plan. And it's not even just this project, it's all of the projects that we've done or plan to do so that the community can really get an understanding of what we have been doing to try to fulfill these plans. If the city council provides direction to staff to change the policy, then that would be what we would take that direction. So these projects are a result of the direction we've already been given from the city council and the vision that the city council has put forward. Should the city council decide to change that, that is what the staff will do in response. So I would ask that you provide written comments to us tonight. You can provide written comments to us, online, or we can talk one-on-one here. But you will also have an opportunity to talk directly to the city council on July 15th, where they will be hearing updates about these plans, including this project. And if the city council intended to change direction on any of those policies or plans, then they could direct staff to do that, and then we would go from there. So that would be my, that is the next step in this process. Should the city council make that decision to change the policy, staff will implement their direction accordingly. Should the staff not, or should the council not want to change any of the plans, then staff will also respond accordingly. So at the end of the day, this is an approval. These plans are approved by the city council, and we do those projects based on that direction. So again, I encourage you to provide us comments. I encourage you to come to the July 15th meeting, or if you can't come, you can provide comments ahead of time. So with that, we are trying to put some of our boards back together, and some of the questions that you have, we can answer one-on-one. And again, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you all for, again, being polite and being kind to one another. Again, we're all neighbors, and I really appreciate being a part of this community. So thank you. Can I get the second microphone? Can I get the second microphone? Microphone is missing. Can I get this?